The morning sun cast long shadows across the grand courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Camilla Parker Bowles adjusted her pearl necklace for the third time in 10 minutes. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to convince herself it was merely the October chill seeping through her designer coat. Today marked exactly 18 months since she had become Queen Consort, and the weight of maintaining her carefully constructed public image had begun to feel crushing. Inside the palace walls, whispers had been growing louder. Staff members exchanged knowing glances when they thought no one was watching. The housekeeping team had discovered torn letters in her private study's wastebasket, fragments of correspondence that painted a picture far different from the gracious, reformed woman the public had come to accept. These letters revealed a network of calculated moves, manipulated situations, and carefully planted stories that had shaped public opinion for decades. Camilla had spent years crafting her transformation from the other woman to the beloved stepmother, and eventually to Queen Consort. Every charity appearance, every gentle smile at public events, every carefully worded interview had been part of an elaborate performance. She had hired the best public relations teams money could buy, planted favorable stories in sympathetic media outlets, and even orchestrated seemingly spontaneous moments that would endear her to the British people. The foundation of her deception began to crack when a former staff member named Margaret Thompson decided she could no longer remain silent. Margaret had worked as Camilla's private secretary for nearly 8 years, witnessing firsthand the machinations behind the public facade. She had kept detailed records of phone calls, meetings, and conversations that revealed the true extent of Camilla's manipulation of public perception. Margaret remembered the afternoon when Camilla had laughed coldly while reading news reports about Diana's struggles with the media. She recalled overhearing phone conversations where Camilla discussed strategies to undermine potential rivals within the royal circle. Most damaging of all, she possessed recordings of Camilla's dismissive comments about the British public, referring to them as easily manipulated and gullible. The breaking point came when Margaret's own daughter was diagnosed with a rare illness that required expensive treatment. She approached Camilla, hoping for assistance from one of the many charities the Queen Consort publicly supported. Instead of compassion, Margaret encountered cold indifference. Camilla's response was swift and cruel, suggesting that Margaret should have planned better for such contingencies and that personal problems had no place in professional relationships. That night, Margaret sat in her modest flat, staring at the locked filing cabinet that contained years of evidence. She thought about her daughter's pale face, the mounting medical bills, and the woman she had served loyally who had shown no humanity when it mattered most. The decision crystallized in her mind like ice forming on winter glass. Meanwhile, Prince William had begun noticing subtle changes in palace dynamics. Staff members seemed nervous around Camilla, and he observed hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when he approached. His instincts, honed by years of navigating royal politics and media scrutiny, told him something significant was brewing beneath the surface. William had always maintained a diplomatic relationship with his stepmother, understanding the importance of family unity for the monarchy's stability. However, he possessed his mother's keen ability to read people and situations. He noticed how Camilla's warmth seemed to evaporate when cameras weren't rolling, how her charitable work appeared to be more about photo opportunities than genuine compassion. During a private dinner at Kensington Palace, William confided in Catherine about his growing concerns. They discussed the increasing tension among palace staff and the strange atmosphere that seemed to follow Camilla wherever she went. Catherine, with her natural empathy and observation skills, mentioned that she too had noticed something unsettling about recent interactions. The couple decided to pay closer attention to the undercurrents swirling around the royal household. They began having quiet conversations with trusted staff members, not to gather gossip, but to understand the source of the growing unease that seemed to permeate palace life. As autumn deepened into winter, Margaret Thompson made her final preparations, She had copied crucial documents, organized her evidence chronologically, and identified the most reputable journalists who might handle such sensitive material responsibly. She knew that once she stepped forward, there would be no turning back. Her life would change forever, but perhaps her daughter's future could be secured through compensation from media outlets eager for such an explosive story. Camilla remained oblivious to the gathering storm. She continued her public engagements, attended charity functions, and maintained her carefully crafted image. Her confidence in her ability to control narratives had grown over the years, making her believe she was untouchable. She had successfully navigated scandals, overcome public disapproval, and earned a place in history as queen consort. However, small cracks in her facade had begun appearing even before Margaret's decision. A charity director had privately questioned why promised donations from Camilla's patronages never materialized. A journalist had noticed inconsistencies in stories about her early charitable work. Royal biographers had started asking uncomfortable questions about the timeline of certain events during the 1990s. The palace communications team had become increasingly busy managing what they internally called reputation maintenance. Press officers found themselves working overtime to address rumors and clarify statements. The frequency of these interventions had not gone unnoticed by senior palace officials, who began quietly investigating the source of recurring issues. King Charles, despite his deep affection for his wife, could not ignore the growing complexity of managing Camilla's public image. He had noticed the increased workload for his communications staff and the subtle stress that seemed to affect everyone involved in Camilla's public appearances. While he attributed much of this to the natural challenges of royal life, he began asking more pointed questions about specific incidents and media responses. The palace staff, caught between loyalty to the crown and their growing discomfort with certain behaviors they witnessed, found themselves in an increasingly difficult position. Many had signed strict confidentiality agreements, but the ethical weight of their knowledge grew heavier with each passing day. As December approached, Margaret Thompson made her first contact with investigative journalist Sarah Richardson, known for her careful handling of sensitive royal stories. The initial conversation was brief and coded, but it set in motion a chain of events that would soon expose the carefully constructed web of deception that had protected Camilla for so long. The stage was set for a revelation that would shake the monarchy to its core and finally expose the truth behind the polished public image that had taken decades to build. In the coming weeks, the world would witness the spectacular collapse of one of the most successful public relations campaigns in modern royal history. The phone call that changed everything came on a dreary Tuesday morning in January. Sarah Richardson sat in her cluttered London office, surrounded by half-empty coffee cups and stacks of research materials, when Margaret Thompson's voice crackled through the receiver with trembling determination. The former palace secretary had finally decided to reveal everything she knew about Camilla's elaborate deception. Their first meeting took place in a small cafe in Hampstead Heath, far from the prying eyes of palace security and royal correspondents. Margaret arrived early, clutching a worn leather briefcase that contained 18 years of carefully documented evidence. Her hands shook as she ordered tea, knowing that the contents of her briefcase would soon destroy the public image of the queen consort. Sarah Richardson had built her reputation on meticulous fact-checking and ethical journalism. She understood the gravity of what Margaret was offering and the potential consequences for everyone involved. As Margaret began sharing her story, laying out documents and recordings with methodical precision, Sarah realized she was witnessing the unraveling of one of the most sophisticated public relations campaigns in modern history. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Phone recordings revealed Camilla's cold calculation in manipulating public sympathy, particularly regarding her relationship with Diana's sons. Written correspondence showed how she had orchestrated favorable media coverage while simultaneously undermining potential critics. Most shocking were the transcripts of conversations where Camilla expressed contempt for the very people who had come to accept her as their queen. Margaret's documentation revealed a pattern of behavior that spanned decades. She had recorded instances where Camilla had claimed credit for charitable initiatives she had never supported, manipulated statistics about her public engagements, and created false narratives about her relationship with the late Queen Elizabeth. The evidence showed a woman who had built her entire public persona on carefully constructed lies. While Sarah Richardson worked around the clock to verify Margaret's claims, strange things began happening at Buckingham Palace. Senior staff members noticed that Camilla seemed increasingly agitated during private moments. She snapped at assistants over minor issues, canceled several upcoming engagements without explanation, and spent long hours behind closed doors making urgent phone calls. Palace insiders later revealed that Camilla had somehow learned about Margaret's departure from her position and had grown suspicious about her former secretary's intentions. She began reaching out to former employees, offering generous financial settlements in exchange for renewed confidentiality agreements. The desperation in these offers raised red flags among those who received them. Prince William's awareness of the brewing crisis came through his own network of trusted contacts within the palace hierarchy. A senior equerry, who had served the royal family for over 2 decades, approached him during a private moment at Windsor Castle. The conversation was brief but pointed, with the equerry expressing concern about unusual activities surrounding the Queen Consort's office. William's response was measured and thoughtful. He had learned from his father's experiences and understood the delicate nature of internal palace politics. Rather than rushing to judgment, he began his own quiet investigation, speaking confidentially with long-serving staff members and carefully observing behavioral changes throughout the royal household. The Prince of Wales discovered that several staff members had been approached about signing additional confidentiality documents, something that struck him as highly unusual and potentially problematic. His security detail had also reported increased activity around Camilla's private offices, with shredding services being called in multiple times during unusual hours. As William pieced together these concerning developments, he made a decision that would prove crucial in the coming weeks. He instructed his private secretary to begin documenting all unusual activities and to maintain detailed records of any attempts to influence palace staff. This decision would later provide valuable corroboration for the evidence that Margaret Thompson was preparing to release. Meanwhile, Sarah Richardson's investigation had expanded beyond Margaret's initial evidence. She had reached out to other former palace employees, charity directors, and media contacts who had worked with Camilla over the years. The pattern that emerged was consistent and deeply troubling, revealing a systematic approach to deception that had fooled the British public for decades. One particularly damaging revelation came from a former charity director who had worked closely with Camilla on several high-profile initiatives. The director, speaking on condition of anonymity, revealed that Camilla had repeatedly taken credit for fundraising efforts she had never participated in, claimed personal relationships with beneficiaries she had never met, and exaggerated her involvement in successful projects while distancing herself from any failures. The charity director also provided evidence of Camilla's dismissive attitude toward the causes she publicly championed. Private emails showed her referring to certain charitable events as tedious obligations and expressing frustration about having to pretend to care about these people. These communications painted a picture of someone who viewed charitable work purely as a tool for public relations rather than genuine compassion. As February arrived, Sarah Richardson felt she had gathered enough evidence to proceed with her investigation. She had spent weeks verifying claims, cross-referencing documents, and ensuring that every allegation could be substantiated. The weight of responsibility was enormous, as she knew her reporting would likely trigger a constitutional crisis and forever change the public's perception of the monarchy. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. A former communications director who had left the palace under mysterious circumstances 2 years earlier contacted Sarah through intermediaries. This individual possessed recordings of strategy meetings where Camilla and her advisors had discussed ways to further manipulate public opinion and silence potential critics. These recordings were particularly devastating because they captured Camilla's voice clearly expressing contempt for the British people and laughing about how easily they had been deceived. In one particularly damaging segment, she could be heard joking about the gullibility of the masses and celebrating her success in rewriting history regarding her role in the breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage. Back at the palace, King Charles had begun noticing the increasing tension surrounding his wife. Palace staff seemed nervous in his presence, and he observed unusual patterns in Camilla's behavior and schedule. His decades of experience in royal life had taught him to recognize the signs of developing crisis, and he could sense that something significant was building beneath the surface. Charles found himself in an impossible position. His love for Camilla was genuine and deep, but his responsibility to the crown required him to address any threats to the monarchy's stability. He began having discreet conversations with his most trusted advisors, trying to understand the source of the growing unease without directly confronting his wife. The tension reached a breaking point during a family dinner at Clarence House in late February. William and Catherine were visiting, and the conversation naturally turned to upcoming public engagements and charitable commitments. When Camilla spoke about her recent charity work, William noticed inconsistencies in her account that didn't match information he had received from his own contacts. The subtle exchange of glances between William and Catherine did not go unnoticed by either Charles or Camilla. The atmosphere in the dining room grew heavy with unspoken tensions, and the evening ended earlier than usual with polite but strained farewells. That night, as William and Catherine drove back to Kensington Palace, they both acknowledged that the situation had reached a critical point. William made the decision to have a frank conversation with his father, understanding that the monarchy's future might depend on addressing whatever crisis was developing before it exploded into public view. Meanwhile, Sarah Richardson was putting the finishing touches on what would become the most significant royal exposé of the modern era. Her investigation had uncovered a web of deception so extensive and so carefully constructed that it challenged everything the public believed about Camilla's transformation from controversial figure to beloved queen consort. The stage was set for a revelation that would not only destroy Camilla's carefully crafted image, but also test the monarchy's ability to survive one of the most damaging scandals in its recent history. As March approached, the various threads of investigation, family tension, and mounting evidence were about to converge in a spectacular and very public collapse. The bombshell dropped on a crisp March morning when Sarah Richardson's investigation was published simultaneously across 3 major British newspapers. The coordinated release ensured maximum impact and prevented any attempt at suppression or damage control. The headlines screamed across front pages, "The Queen Consort's Web of Lies, Decades of Deception Exposed," and "Camilla's Elaborate Fraud Revealed." The public reaction was immediate and explosive. Social media platforms crashed under the weight of millions of people sharing, commenting, and expressing their shock and outrage. The evidence presented was so comprehensive and damaging that even Camilla's most devoted supporters found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about the woman who had become their queen consort. At Buckingham Palace, chaos erupted behind the usually serene facade. Emergency meetings were called as senior advisors tried to develop a response strategy for the most damaging royal scandal in decades. The palace communications team, already overwhelmed by years of managing Camilla's image, found themselves facing an impossible task. How do you defend someone when the evidence against them is so overwhelming and well documented? Camilla herself was found by staff members in her private study, staring at the newspapers spread across her mahogany desk with tears streaming down her face. For the first time in decades, her carefully maintained composure had completely shattered. The woman who had spent years manipulating public opinion was now watching her entire world collapse in real time as the truth finally emerged. The recordings were perhaps the most devastating evidence. When major television networks began broadcasting excerpts of Camilla's voice expressing contempt for the British people, the public's anger reached a fever pitch. Her laughter about deceiving the masses and her dismissive comments about charitable causes she had publicly championed sparked protests outside royal residences across the country. Prince William's response became the defining moment of the crisis. While his father struggled with the personal and professional implications of his wife's exposure, William stepped forward with a clarity and moral authority that surprised many observers. His statement, delivered from Kensington Palace, was brief but powerful, expressing his commitment to truth and transparency in royal service. What many didn't know was that William had been preparing for this moment for months. His quiet investigation had provided him with advanced knowledge of the scope of Camilla's deception, allowing him to position himself as a voice of integrity when the scandal broke. His response demonstrated a political sophistication that marked him as a future king, ready to lead during crisis. The most shocking moment came during a press conference 3 days after the initial revelations. When asked directly about his stepmother's behavior, William's response sent shockwaves through the establishment. He didn't defend Camilla or attempt damage control. Instead, he spoke about the importance of honesty in public service and the need for accountability at all levels of the monarchy. Then came the moment that would be replayed millions of times on social media and news programs worldwide. When a journalist asked if he found the situation amusing given his stepmother's past treatment of his mother, William's face broke into what could only be described as a knowing smile. He didn't speak for several seconds, letting the weight of the question hang in the air before simply saying, "I believe in justice and truth prevailing." That brief smile became an internet sensation within hours. Memes spread across social platforms showing William's expression alongside captions celebrating poetic justice and long-overdue accountability. The image captured a moment of vindication that millions of people felt after learning the extent of Camilla's deception. Public opinion polls showed devastating results for both Camilla and the monarchy as a whole. Support for the Queen Consort plummeted to single digits, while calls for her removal from royal duties grew louder each day. Protest organizers drew massive crowds to demonstrations outside Buckingham Palace, with many carrying signs demanding Camilla's immediate resignation from all royal roles. King Charles faced the most difficult decision of his reign. The evidence against his wife was undeniable, and the damage to the monarchy's reputation was severe and growing worse each day. Palace advisors presented him with stark options: take decisive action against Camilla or risk further damage to the institution he had waited decades to lead. The breaking point came when Margaret Thompson appeared on a prime-time television interview, providing even more damaging details about Camilla's behavior behind closed doors. She described incidents of cruelty toward staff members, manipulation of charitable funds, and a pattern of behavior that revealed someone completely different from the woman the public had been encouraged to admire. Margaret's composure during the interview was remarkable given the pressure she faced. She answered every question with quiet dignity, providing specific examples and dates that could be verified. When asked about her motivation for coming forward, she spoke movingly about her daughter's illness and Camilla's callous response to a family in crisis. The interview also revealed new information about how Camilla had actively worked to undermine other members of the royal family when she perceived them as threats to her position. Former staff members came forward with stories of how she had spread rumors, manipulated situations, and used her influence to damage relationships within the royal circle. Perhaps most damaging were the revelations about Camilla's attitude toward Princess Catherine. Evidence emerged of attempts to undermine Catherine's popularity and influence, including planted negative stories and behind-the-scenes efforts to limit her role in major royal events. This information particularly angered the public, who had embraced Catherine as a positive force within the monarchy. William's response to these revelations about his wife was swift and decisive. He issued a statement expressing his complete confidence in Catherine and his determination to protect his family from any further manipulation or interference. The contrast between his strong support for his wife and Charles's conflicted position regarding Camilla was not lost on royal observers. As the crisis entered its second week, international media attention intensified the pressure on the royal family. The scandal had become global news, with commentators worldwide questioning the monarchy's credibility and future. Tourism to royal sites began declining as the institution's reputation suffered unprecedented damage. The financial implications also became clear as major sponsors began withdrawing support from charities associated with Camilla. The ripple effects extended throughout the network of organizations that had benefited from royal patronage, creating additional victims of her deception. Inside the palace, staff members who had remained silent for years began speaking more openly about their experiences. A culture of fear and intimidation that had protected Camilla's secrets was finally breaking down, as people realized they could now tell their stories without facing retribution. The final blow came when several major charitable organizations announced they were severing all ties with Camilla and launching independent investigations into any funds or initiatives associated with her patronage. The systematic dismantling of her charitable empire provided concrete evidence of the real-world consequences of her deception. As March drew to a close, it became clear that Camilla's position as queen consort had become untenable. The web of lies she had carefully constructed over decades had not only collapsed, but had done so in the most public and humiliating way possible. The woman who had once laughed about deceiving the masses now faced a future where her every public appearance would be met with protests and ridicule. William's quiet satisfaction during this period was noted by many observers. While he maintained his dignity and refrained from public gloating, those close to him reported a sense of vindication that justice had finally been served. The man who had grown up watching his mother suffer under Camilla's manipulations was now witnessing the complete exposure and downfall of the woman who had caused so much pain to his family. The monarchy would survive this crisis, but it would be forever changed. The public's trust, once lost, would take years to rebuild. Camilla's legacy was now permanently defined not by her supposed transformation, but by the elaborate web of lies that had finally collapsed under the weight of truth. In the end, her greatest deception had been convincing herself that she could fool everyone forever.